Welcome everybody. This is the first of our virtual lectures. I'm going to start from the end of the first part of the semester for the last of our landscape lectures, imaginary landscapes. Unfortunately, many of you were unable to attend that lecture, so I'm going to offer a recap here today. The lecture, as you will receive it, is divided into a number of sections, and the first part consists of visions of hell. Hell is a strait and dark and foul-smelling prison, an abode of demons and lost souls, filled with fire and smoke. The straitness of this prison house is expressly designed by God to punish those who refuse to be bound by his laws. In earthly prisons, the poor captive has at least some liberty of movement. Not so in hell. There, by reason of the great numbers of the damned, the prisoners are heaped together in their awful prison, the walls of which are said to be 4,000 miles thick, and the damned are so utterly bound and helpless that, as that blessed saint St. Anselm writes in his book on similitudes, they are not even able to remove from the eye a worm that gnaws it. That is James Joyce's vision of hell from the early 20th century in Ireland, from his book, Portrait of the Artist. It must be remembered immediately that many of our visionary landscapes, our imaginary landscapes, are taken from the works of authors and not from the imagination of artists. Here we see a detail by a painting from the 15th century, from round about 1423, by Fra Angelico. It's a detail of a vision of hell, where we see the devil holding in his hands the damned, while he himself is boiling in a cauldron. The painting in its entirety is shown here. The unusual shape has been explained as a chair back. It has been suggested that this is the chair in which the prior of the convent of San Marco sat when passing judgment on the affairs of the convent over which he rules. It was expected, of course, that the convent's judgments would mirror the judgments of Christ, and that his justice would echo on earth the justice meted out by Christ in heaven. A couple of details for you. On the left, we see a fantasy garden, the Garden of Paradise. Here we imagine or see angels and the blessed with their halos dancing through the garden as they're led by the angels towards rays of heavenly light emanating from the great walls of the pink paradise that awaits them. On the right, we have a vision of hell divided into 7 segments corresponding to the 7 deadly sins. You can see easily a table set for eternity for the gluttons, those who have eaten and drunk too much in this life. We see devils forcing them to eat and drink for eternity, while below the wrathful and the envious are being burned by their fires of their own particular sins. And down below, the devil. Notice in the devil's right hand, our left, as we look across, a friar, a Dominican friar, is actually being held. Fra Angelico reminding his brothers in the convent that if they didn't obey the prior, they too would suffer eternal damnation. So come with me and we will enter into hell itself. This is the 19th century, a vision of hell by William Blake. Towards the end of his life, in the 1820s, Blake was commissioned for 100 or so watercolors to illustrate all of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Here we see his illustration to Canto 3, the moment when Dante and Virgil together enter into hell. Virgil as the guide, seen here in blue, and Dante being led by the hand. Beyond the two figures, we have a vision of hell itself. Notice that it is both red and blue. The red fires sweeping up represent the fires of hell, whereas the blue represent the freezing nature of hell. Hell is composed of two elements, both eternally burning fires and freezing and thus burning ice. So we have the icicles in blue representing one of the elements of hell, and the red burning fires. You can just about make out the inscription over the doorway, "Leave every hope, you who enter here." In another watercolor, we see the moment in Canto 10 when Dante and Virgil encounter the philosopher Cavalcanti dei Cavalcanti. Here you see Cavalcanti has arisen from his fiery tomb to predict to Dante his eventual exile from Florence, while beyond we see a schematic landscape of Florence itself burning, going up in flames. It has been suggested that Dante's great vision of the tortures of the Inferno were inspired by the mosaics on the baptistry ceiling. The baptistry in Florence, decorated with a great vision of the Last Judgement, and we can see a detail here. Completed round about 1250, it has been suggested that Dante saw these recently finished mosaics before his exile and was inspired by them to imagine the tortures of hell itself, because here we see the evildoers are being burnt by fire, roasted on spits, crushed with stones, bitten by snakes, gnawed and chewed by hideous beasts. Perhaps Dante imagined those same sort of ideas when he came to write his great epic poem. Another illustration for Dante's Inferno by Botticelli this time. In the 1480s, Botticelli was commissioned by a cousin of Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, the de facto ruler of Florence. He was asked to complete 92 drawings illustrating the entirety of Dante's great epic poem. Much of it, unfortunately, unfinished, but here we see the preface, the great tunnel vision of hell. You can see the circles of hell diminishing here towards a great circle, a half circle in the bottom of the picture, in icy blue, the abode of the devil. It's very difficult to make out the details, but if we just look at one little detail here, we can see Dante and Virgil traveling down the various levels of hell to eventually arrive before the devil and then pass on beyond him to purgatory and eventually to paradise. As I said, the work remained unfinished, although there are nearly 100 drawings. Many of them are not infilled and painted. Here, however, is just one. This is Canto 18. Here we see Virgil and Dante, Virgil in blue and purple, leading Dante in red and green, through the circles where they encounter here the panderers, the seducers, and the flatterers. It's a continuous narrative. They descend beyond one circle to another and to another. We see the flatterers, Dante obviously disliking the flatterers very much, here in a great lake of shit. We're not, however, constructing a lecture on illustrations to Dante, but most of the visions of hell, as we want to look at them today, can be found in visions of the Last Judgment. That is that moment when Christ will come again to judge both the quick and the dead. And here we see one of the most splendid examples of that, finished round about 1305 by Giotto in the Arena Chapel in Padua. This particular vision of the Last Judgment can be found on the entrance wall of the Arena Chapel. And here we see Christ in majesty in a great mandala of gold, coming again to judge, as I said before, the quick and the dead. The quick are the little figures at the bottom of the picture on the left, rising from their tombs. You can see them struggling out of the rocky terrain to be judged, while above them we have images of them being received by the angels and escorted up to the apostles and saints who are sitting on their throne beside God. Giovanni Scrovegni, the man who actually built the chapel, was a banker, and he's seen at the bottom of the picture, kneeling in mauve before a vision of his chapel held by three angels. Scrovegni was a banker, and of course he had earned his money and a good living through usury, that is, loaning out money at interest. This, of course, was forbidden by the church and was considered a sin. He hoped that by building a chapel in honor of Christ and the Virgin, that his sins would somehow be atoned. And Giotto was commissioned to present this great vision of the Last Judgment. A few details for you. As we've seen before, hell is imagined both as ice and fire. And here we see a great river of ice and fire snaking across the chapel, down to a vision of the devil himself. The devil here eating the damned while he sits on a great snaky throne composed of dragons. While he has eaten the dead and the damned, he then disgorges them out from his anus down below. It's a horrific vision. A few details for you. You can see here that we have, again, the sins depicted on the far left. We can see a red devil with horns for teeth and a blue devil struggling with a usurer who's being weighed down into hell by his money bags. While on the other side, we see all sorts of sinners being pulled down into hell by their hair and genitalia. An horrific scene. Above the window in the chapel, we see the devils leading the damned who have just been judged. Rather ironically, the first figure to be led into hell, wearing a little wrap around his shoulder and a red cap, is a judge who had given false judgment. Behind him, a great figure carrying a scroll, reading out the crimes. We have a miller with a sack of wheat on his shoulder. A miller here who had fraudulently deceived his clients. Remember from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales that the miller was often fraudulent and would not give the equal amount of grain back to his clients who had brought the wheat to be ground. Here he is being punished for his sins. While above them, we have a Franciscan friar being pulled down into hell by the devils. While above him, a poor woman is being hooked and grappled into hell. No walk of life escapes here. What makes Giotto's image so horrific is the fact that although it's allegorical, you can see a slanderer being hung by his tongue. Many of the tortures depicted are in fact the sort of tortures that could be found in the 13th and 14th centuries. On the far left of the image, as you look, the man turned upside down is actually being sliced or sawn in half by a pair of devils. This in fact was a punishment, a capital punishment, meted out in the Middle Ages for the sin of sodomy. Something different, we move to Germany in the 15th century, the early 15th century. This is a painting by the German artist Stefan Lochner. It's his vision of the Last Judgment, painted around about 1435 for the town hall in Cologne. The painting itself forms part of a large triptych, now unfortunately dismembered, but the surviving fragments found in the art museum in Cologne. Here again we have an image of the Last Judgment. As in St. Marco, we find in a secular situation here an image of the Last Judgment. This is the idea that the town council, when passing judgment, would sit below such a scene, and it would remind them both that they should make sound judgment when passing their laws, but also for those who would witness the councillors, to remind them that the council's judgment echoes on earth the sort of judgment they would expect to find in the afterlife when Christ has come again. A couple of details for you. On the left, we saw the blessed entering into paradise. Paradise imagined as a great Gothic cathedral. And here I show you a detail. We have a parapet above the entrance with wonderful Gothic tracery, where the heavenly choir with musical instruments welcomes the blessed. Opposite, we have hell imagined as a burning and ruined castle. We have an aerial combat where blue angels wrestle with green and brown devils for the souls of the blessed. It's a struggle that is very much ongoing and undecided. Down below, we have, between the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist as intercessors, a great parade of those who are about to be judged. One more detail for you. Here we have somebody arising from their tomb, pulled from their tomb by an angel, while he looks back in horror as two demons, imagined as a sort of bear and monkey elephant faced grotesque, claw behind him to drag him off to hell. As I said before, this is very much a battle that is ongoing. And here we find one of those demons, a wonderful detail where Lochner has let his imagination run completely riot, where we have this monkey-faced demon snarling and growling as he hopes to grapple with the damned as they appear before him. We'll pick up this idea of the fantasy of hell when we start our second part, which will be with the visions of hell created by Hieronymus Bosch. Thank you very much for listening. I'll speak to you again very soon.